big story coming out of Minnesota, which of course is a powder keg right now as the George Floyd trial is now in the hands of the jury. An already delicate situation was made worse this weekend by Congresswoman Maxine Waters, the California Congresswoman flying into Minnesota, trying to get some attention, stir some things up, and pour gasoline on the fire by joining protesters outside the Brooklyn Center Police Department. Here she is encouraging people to get confrontational if the right verdict, in her opinion, isn't reached in the Derek Chauvin trial.
We're looking for a guilty verdict. We got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
Remember when Democrats said Donald Trump incited an insurrection by telling a crowd to peacefully march and make their voices heard? The same clowns have no problem with Maxine Waters' comments. Figure that out. The best part, thanks to reporting from townhall.com, we now know that Maxine Waters requested a police escort before heading over to this police protest. Just process the incredible hypocrisy of this woman. What an utter embarrassment she is. Of course, nobody on the left will denounce Maxine Waters' comments. As Trump always said, the left knows how to stick together, even when one of them is insane. Here's Press Secretary Jen Psaki today.
Does the president agree with what she said about getting more confrontational?
Well, I can speak to the president's view. He has been very clear that he recognizes the issue of police violence against people of color, communities of color, is one of great anguish, and it's exhausting and quite emotional at times.
Of course, Republicans jumped all over Maxine Waters for this nonsense. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene announced on Sunday she plans to introduce a resolution to expel Waters. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy tweeted, Maxine Waters is inciting violence in Minneapolis just as she has incited it in the past. If Speaker Pelosi doesn't act against this dangerous rhetoric, I will bring action this week. I wouldn't hold my breath on any of that personally. This is what Pelosi told reporters today. Quote, Maxine talked about confrontation in the manner of the civil rights movement. No, I don't think she should apologize. Everybody mortified to say anything about this subject, obviously. Welcome to the modern Democrat Party. They're all in on this narrative, as much of a lie as it is. Blacks are being hunted by cops. Ignore the actual facts, ignore the numbers. Just shut up and believe it. And pay attention to these cherry-picked cases that represent a barely indistinguishable fraction of the millions and millions of police interactions that occur every single year. Of course, this is all just politics. Kamala Harris tweeted this during last year's riots, right after George Floyd died. If you are able to, chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota. Harris and Biden rode those riots right into the White House. As for Maxine Waters, she incites violence quite often, it would appear. Here she is in 2018 calling for Trump supporters to be harassed.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Classy stuff from Maxine, but it's not the first time her big mouth may have gotten her into trouble this time. The judge in the Derek Chauvin trial today, Peter Cahill, denied the defense's motion for a mistrial over those comments made by Maxine Waters, but he did have something to say to the California Congresswoman.
I wish elected officials would stop talking about this case, especially in a manner that is disrespectful to the rule of law and to the judicial branch and our function.
While the judge said there weren't grounds for a mistrial because of what she said, he also did have this comment to say, which is really interesting.
It's mind-boggling to me, Judge.
Well, I'll give you that Congresswoman Waters may have given you something on appeal that may result in this whole trial being overturned.
May result in this whole trial being overturned. Just think for a second how incredible it would be if Chauvin is convicted and then gets off on an appeal and the left suddenly makes Maxine Waters public enemy number one. You can only dream. Could happen. While the White House didn't call for a guilty verdict like Maxine did, Jen Psaki continued to use the Derek Chauvin trial to push the narrative, the Democrats' narrative, of police violence against African Americans. Here is where she says the president stands on this issue.
As you know, he met with the Floyd family last year and has been closely following the trial, as we've been talking about, and is committed to undoing this long-standing systemic problem.
Long-standing systemic problem. Again, they're just going to keep saying it until people think it's true. This is from the Manhattan Institute, citing data from the Washington Post. The police fatally shot 9 unarmed blacks and 19 unarmed whites in 2019. It's all a lie. Every bit of this is a lie. It's a demonstrable lie. The behavior in this country is so embarrassing right now, and the left will just keep doubling down on this garbage until everyone just complies and nods affirmatively, like the sheep they want us to be. Just shut up and accept it. Meanwhile, another false liberal narrative was debunked today involving the Capitol riot on January 6th and the death of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. Well, it appears Sicknick was not murdered by Trump supporters during the Capitol riot. This is a really big deal. You'll remember the New York Times reported Sicknick was hit in the head with a fire extinguisher before they had to retract that a few weeks later. They quietly just retracted. They didn't want you to pay any attention to it. They just kind of took it away. Officer Sicknick's own mom was not given an explanation from our government, but told the Daily Mail he wasn't hit on the head. No, we think he had a stroke, but we don't know anything for sure. We'd love to know what happened. That came out a long time after it all went down. That didn't stop the mainstream media, though, from repeating the story even after she made those comments and calling the Trump supporters a murderous mob. The amount of pleasure the media got out of pushing that story, the story that Trump supporters killed a cop, they loved it so much. You could see the satisfaction washing over them every time they said it, like a powerful opiate, every time they got to repeat it on TV.
The most recent casualty of the mob that the president and other Republicans incited is Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick. He's a 42-year-old veteran. According to reporting, Officer Sicknick was struck with a fire extinguisher.
U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who apparently was beaten to death with a fire extinguisher by the Trump mob that day.
Officer Brian Sicknick died after being hit in the head with a fire extinguisher.
By the way, that was the only cop that the media has cared about in the last 5 years. They made a really big deal about that one because they thought a Trump supporter killed him. For 3 months, our government allowed that narrative to be pushed. Our government did. You know, there were people, and a lot of people, who knew that he wasn't murdered. They were in no hurry to correct that lie because a lot of them liked that lie. Here's our old friend Maxine Waters, using it to its full advantage, talking about Donald Trump.
He absolutely should be charged with premeditated murder because of the lives that were lost with this invasion, with this insurrection.
The great thing about being in politics is you don't have to know anything. You don't have to be intelligent in any way. You can just say whatever you want like she does. Does she ever say anything intelligent or true? Have you ever heard anything come out of her mouth that made any sense? No. She's still there. She'll be there forever. Today, this narrative was officially debunked. The Washington Post had to write it. I'm sure they hated every minute of it. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who engaged rioters, suffered 2 strokes and died of natural causes, officials say. Had 2 strokes. You know they hated writing this, having to admit this. The Capitol chief medical examiner saying there was no evidence of internal or external injuries. No evidence. Sicknick suffered 2 strokes at the base of the brain stem caused by a clot in an artery that supplies blood to that area of the body. Think about how much that changes. How much time the media has spent talking about this murderous, riotous insurrection. That's the truth of what happened to Officer Sicknick. He wasn't killed by Trump supporters. Now we know more than 3 months later. Remember when liberals ridiculed anyone questioning their version of this story? Oh, they went after people who questioned it, like Josh Marshall of the leftist outlet Talking. There's now a Brian Sicknick, quote, truth movement on the right, which suggests Sicknick either died of natural causes or was murdered to tarnish ex-President Trump. Today, this new conspiracy theory made its way to National Review. I trace it to its source.
Hey, I'm Rob Finnerty. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please join the conversation in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, too. Hit the bell icon to be alerted to breaking news. And remember, there's a whole lot more on Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news network. Newsmax TV, we're real news for real people.